James Archibald Hope's The Military Memoirs of an Infantry Officer offers a vivid account of his experiences in the British Army during the Napoleonic Wars. Hope shares insights into battles, soldier life, and the camaraderie of the infantry, providing a first-hand glimpse into the challenges and resilience of military service. These are his words. Let's begin. As soon as it was known in Brussels that the Allied army had retired from Quatre Bras and the Prussians from Ligny, the whole population was thrown into a state of agitation not to be described. The 17th was a day of alarm, the 18th one of horror. That part of the old ramparts which faces Waterloo was crowded at an early hour with people of every description. Until nearly 2 o'clock, all was conjecture. But from that hour, wounded soldiers arrived every minute from the field of blood. At one time, it was said Napoleon had been defeated, at another that he was victorious and would enter Brussels in the evening. These reports threw the good people into a state of mind bordering on insanity. At first, the wounded were few and far between, but in a short time the road was covered with them. About 4:30, the alarm of the citizens was at its height, a French column having been seen on its march to Brussels, but whether as victors or prisoners none could tell, for none had ever inquired. By and by the column entered, 2,000 in number, but not as was anticipated by everybody victors, but as prisoners of war, being those we captured at 3 o'clock. Fears, however, still continued to haunt their breasts, for nothing could convince them but that Napoleon must be the conqueror. On the arrival of our wounded in Brussels, all ranks vied with each other in acts of personal kindness and attention. Many of the most respectable inhabitants, ladies as well as gentlemen, waited their arrival at the gates and to each soldier distributed wine, tea, coffee, soup, bread, and cordials of various descriptions. Those who remained at home ministered to the wants of the poor, maimed, houseless wanderers, dressed their wounds, and if unable, from the severity of their wounds, to proceed farther, a bed was immediately provided for them, on which they might rest their wearied and fractured limbs. In almost every house there were wounded soldiers. In order to show the number quartered in these houses and the country to which they belonged, the inhabitants affixed a paper on their windows or their doors, intimating that they had 4 wounded English or 4 wounded Scottish, etc. Nothing could exceed the attention of the ladies to their patients. In the house where I was quartered, there were 3 ladies, the mother and 2 daughters. The latter always visited the hospitals morning and evening, taking with them such articles of food or clothing as they thought the sufferers required. One morning, the youngest returned in tears. Having seen a number of bad cases, the amiable and humane little creature thought that she would be able to view without shrinking the mangled frame of an unfortunate artillery officer who had lost both his legs. But on entering his chamber, she found the poor sufferer in the agonies of death. This being more than she could bear, she burst into tears, hurried from the apartment, and returned home in the state of mind previously described. In the Rue de l'Empereur, another family, consisting of an aged mother, a son, and 3 daughters, set apart 2 front rooms of the street floor for the accommodation of the wounded. One of them was fitted up with mattresses for those who were completely disabled, and the other as a laboratory and cooking apartment, where all those who could stroll about had their wounds dressed by the young ladies. Whatever medicines or nourishment was required were distributed with a bountiful hand. The French wounded were almost all placed in the city hospitals or the houses of those who had shown themselves to be anything but friendly to the pending struggle. Many of the poor wretches, although not able to lift their heads from their pillows, kept constantly crying, "Vive l'Empereur!" One day, an officer sent by Louis XVIII went round the various hospitals to inquire into the wants of the patients and offer assistance to all who required it. But they replied that they had no king but one, Vive l'Empereur, and one of them, finding he had but a short time to live, converted the cry into a kind of song, which he chanted as long as he could speak. At the close of the memorable charge made by us at 3 o'clock, a friend of mine made lawful prize of a beautiful charger, very richly caparisoned. The richness of the furniture led him to expect a pair of handsome pistols in the holsters, but on opening them he was most agreeably disappointed to find that a good bottle of champagne occupied the one, and the leg of a fowl and a piece of bread the other. Our mouths being much parched at the time, the bottle was instantly decapitated by my friend's sword, who, being of a very generous disposition, shared the wine with another officer and myself. It was, without exception, the most delicious glass of champagne I ever drank. A French general who was made prisoner on the 18th, having on various occasions rendered himself rather conspicuous by his entire devotion to the cause of the usurper, was very roughly treated on entering Brussels. To court the favour of the populace, the general had no sooner entered the city than he, in a true turncoat style, cried, "Vive le roi!" But he soon found that he had committed a most egregious blunder, for, indignant at his barefaced impudence, the people pelted him with mud and offal until he quitted the city at the other extremity. Immediately after the battle, the Bonapartists charged Marshals Ney and Grouchy with all the misfortunes that had befallen the French army on the 16th and 18th of June. Ney, in a letter to Fouché, attempted to exculpate himself from so foul a charge, but his conduct to Louis XVIII had made such a deep impression on the minds of the people that his statement was not generally credited. With us, however, the charge was looked upon as a patched-up story to lessen the glory achieved by the Allied armies on the plains of Waterloo. The fact is that Napoleon was not betrayed by his marshals, but by himself. Every man who betrays a friend is ever after deemed unworthy to associate with honourable men. How much more unworthy must that man be who betrays the interests of his legitimate sovereign and those of 30 million of his countrymen? This being the marshal's crime, was it possible for the French troops either to respect a man loaded with so much guilt, or to place the smallest confidence in him in the hour of danger? I should think not, and therefore I conceive that Bonaparte, by appointing Ney to the command of the troops destined to act against the Duke of Wellington on the 16th, actually betrayed his own interests, for it was notorious that it was want of confidence in their leader that made from 40 to 50,000 French soldiers recoil before a force not more than half their number during the struggle at Quatre Bras. Had the marshal's honour been as pure as in his former campaigns, the retreat of some of his troops so far as Charleroi that afternoon would never have taken place. No, a single word from his lips would at once have arrested any attempt of the kind. Knowing, therefore, as Bonaparte did that to Ney's tainted character he owed a considerable portion of the disgrace brought on his arms at Quatre Bras, was it not the act of a madman to appoint the same individual to a prominent command on the 18th, and thereby to prepare the way for a fresh defeat and all its accompanying ills? But tyrants and traitors deserve no better fate than that which overtook Napoleon and his marshal on the plains of Waterloo. With regard to the charge against Grouchy, there are no better grounds for it than the one preferred against his brother marshal. There is not a doubt but both of them did everything in their power to secure the victory for their master. The real cause of this charge being preferred at all may, therefore, I imagine, be traced to the following source. Calculating upon Blucher continuing his retreat, or upon his utter inability to render the Duke of Wellington any efficient assistance for some days, Bonaparte made arrangements for a general attack upon the position of the latter at Waterloo, to favour which instructions were dispatched to Grouchy, to assault that of the Prussians at Wavre with great vigour. Having made his calculations on false data as regarded the capabilities of the Prussians to assist their allies, and not discovering his error until on the eve of engaging the Allied army, Napoleon found himself all at once placed in a ticklish, or rather in what may be termed a false position. To extricate himself from this dilemma, two alternatives offered: to retreat, or to endeavour to force the position of the Allies before the Prussians could arrive to their assistance. It has been shown that he preferred the latter and was routed, and to throw part of the blame of this step from his own shoulders, Bonaparte trumped up the charge against Grouchy, which was altogether discredited by every member of the Allied or Prussian armies. How are they bandied up and down by fate, by so much more unhappy as they are great? Whenever a man permits ambition to obtain such an ascendancy over his mind as to lead him to aspire to the summit of all earthly greatness, from that moment he must be prepared to bear up against every variety of fortune that can assail the human race. To an ambitious man like Napoleon Bonaparte, who raises himself from a very humble condition to be the arbiter of nations, the temptations of power, wealth, and pleasure are frequently so powerful as to urge him to put in force every species of dissimulation and every description of treachery, rather than not accomplish the object he has in view. A man like him, previous to being placed at the helm of affairs, is continually muttering something about public liberty and public good. But the moment he fancies himself so firmly fixed in the royal seat that he cannot be removed, his song is instantly converted into personal honours and personal riches. When a sovereign like Napoleon permits all his views to centre in family interests or personal aggrandizement, when the sole object of his pursuit is worldly success, rank, and fortune, can his people have any other feeling towards him than unqualified hatred and contempt? Let those of a similar description who may follow in the wake of Napoleon reflect seriously on the course they are pursuing before it is too late, lest, like him, they may ultimately be made to feel the weight of that irresistible arm which is continually suspended over the heads of tyrants to avenge the cause of the injured and the oppressed. When two nations are at war, and one of them finds it necessary to submit to the mercy of the other, it exhibits neither a prudent nor magnanimous policy on the part of the conqueror to impose dishonourable terms on the vanquished when others far less severe may amply suffice. Few have pursued this short-sighted policy to greater lengths than Napoleon Bonaparte, and none have had greater cause to repent of their conduct. For to what else can we attribute the powerful opposition he met with on his journey towards universal dominion in the latter years of his extraordinary reign? To what but his tyrannical and iniquitous conduct towards Spain and Portugal did he owe the Peninsular War? To what but his insolent and domineering conduct towards all those nations who owned him as a superior or an ally did he owe the war in Russia in 1812 and those in Germany in 1813 and 1814? Born to the earth by a grinding tyranny, the inhabitants of those countries, imitating the example of those who had gone before them, turned round on their oppressor at the first favourable opportunity, and with their strength and their courage increased by despair, rushed against his legions like a torrent, and in their efforts to emancipate themselves from a degrading state of thraldom, continued to perform almost supernatural feats of personal heroism until they either obtained their object or died in the attempt. These facts clearly point out the course which every crowned head ought to pursue who wishes to live respected and die lamented. They must invariably adopt towards all nations and individuals a line of policy governed by honour, justice, and humanity. A charge of cowardice has been preferred against Bonaparte, and by Christian lips too, because he did not choose to die the death of a suicide on the field of Waterloo. To exculpate him from this charge, it is only necessary to remind his accusers that our time is fixed, and all our days are numbered. How long, how short we know not. This we know, duty requires us calmly to wait the summons, nor dare to stir until heaven shall give permission, like sentries that must keep their destined stand and wait the appointed hour till they are relieved. Those only are the brave who keep their ground and keep it to the last. From Waterloo, the French army retreated towards Paris in a state of complete disorganization, hotly pursued by the Duke of Wellington and Prince Blucher. The Duke entered France by Bavay, the Prince by Beaumont. From Malplaquet, the English general, on the 21st of June, addressed a proclamation to the French people, intimating that he was about to enter their country to assist them in throwing off the iron yoke of Napoleon. On the following day, his headquarters were at La Cateau. On the 24th, Sir Charles Colville captured Cambrai, and on the 26th, Louis XVIII entered it on his way to Paris. The same day, General Maitland, with a brigade of guards, took possession of Péronne after a slight resistance. On the arrival of the united armies in the vicinity of the capital, preparations were made to drive the remains of the French army from it, or compel the whole to surrender. Blucher, crossing the Seine at Saint-Germain on the 1st of July, advanced towards the capital by Saint-Cloud, on the heights of which he was warmly received on the 2nd by the enemy, but after a severe conflict, he succeeded in establishing himself in the village of Issy. Here, however, he was attacked early on the following morning, but finally beat off his assailants. Failing in this attempt, and seeing the Allied army ready to storm their entrenchments on the north of the city, the enemy solicited a suspension of hostilities, and the same evening agreed to quit the capital and retire behind the Loire. The French troops accordingly began their march on the 4th, and by the afternoon of the 6th, the whole had proceeded towards their destination. The Prussian and Allied armies entered Paris on the 7th, and Louis XVIII on the following day. Some of the regiments newly arrived from America were thrown into Montmartre, and one brigade of British infantry occupied the Champs-Élysées. The rest of the British army were encamped in the Bois de Boulogne and down the right bank of the Seine as far as Saint-Ouen. Several of the gates of Paris were held by British troops and the remainder by the troops of the other Allied powers. For some days our officers were openly insulted in the streets, and more than one of them was actually spit upon from the windows of several houses near the Palais Royal. In company with a medical friend, I quitted Brussels in the first week of July and proceeded by Braine, La Comte, Mons, Bavay, Cateau, La Châtelet, Péronne, Roya, Gournay, Pont de Saint-Maxence, and the Louvre, and rejoined my corps, encamped behind the village of Clichy on the right bank of the Seine. On the 24th of July, the British and Hanoverian troops passed the Emperor of Russia in review in the Place Louis XIV, and to show his detestation of those persons who brought Louis XVI to the scaffold, Alexander placed himself almost on the spot where that unfortunate monarch lost his life by the hands of the executioner. In order to spare the feelings of the inhabitants, the troops were desired not to wear laurel. But the opportunity being too good to convince the Parisians that their brethren had really been worsted at Waterloo, almost the whole army hoisted the emblem of victory amid deafening cheers. Immediately after passing the Emperor, our old general, Howard, now Lord Howard of Effingham, galloped up to us in private costume, congratulated the few that were present on the additional honours which the regiment had gained, and then, placing himself alongside the commanding officer, accompanied us through various streets of Paris on our route towards our encampment. During the time that this truly estimable and gallant nobleman commanded our brigade in the Peninsula, he was equally beloved by officers and men. From this time down to the end of October, the movements of the Allied army were few, and with 2 or 3 exceptions, extremely unimportant. Drills, division, brigade, and regimental we had in abundance, and often at so early an hour as 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning. Drill, when improvement is the object, is attended by all ranks with pleasure, but when its object is to harass or annoy, it is attended, but with no very friendly feelings towards the person by whom it has been ordered, and therefore, instead of being beneficial, creates a dislike to military exercise and duty of every kind, which should invariably be avoided. I have been led to make these remarks in consequence of what occurred to our brigade in Clichy camp in August 1815. Our general, who was always grumbling at something or other, and was never satisfied with the exertions of either officers or men, at length fell upon a notable plan of punishing us for our inattention, namely, sending us all to the balance or goose step. At sunrise on the morning after the promulgation of the order, our French friends beheld the no less novel than ludicrous exhibition of 2,000 men, each standing on one leg, and 100 or 200 instructors bawling right and left, as if the thunders of Waterloo had deprived the men of the power of knowing their right foot from their left. In a few days the goose step was changed to squad, then to company drill, but finding us a parcel of incorrigibles, he, in a few more, finally dismissed us, conceiving, no doubt, that to continue his lessons of instruction was something like casting pearls before swine. On the 22nd of September, the British and Hanoverian army was reviewed on the plains of St. Denis. Pursuant to the orders of the Field Marshal, the troops were formed by 9 o'clock in the morning, with their left resting on the village of La Chapelle and their right extending towards Saint-Denis. The First Corps, consisting of the 1st and 2nd Divisions of Infantry, formed the left, the Second Corps, 2nd and 4th Divisions, the right, and the reserve, the 5th, 6th and 7th Divisions, the centre. Colonel Estoff's brigade of cavalry formed in rear of the Second Corps in close column of regiments at the front of a squadron, and the cavalry brigades of Lord Edward Somerset and Lord George Beresford formed in a similar manner in rear of the First Corps and reserve. Each division of infantry was formed in 3 lines of brigades in close column of battalions right in front, with its artillery posted on the right. The colours of the regiments forming the front line and the officers of the leading divisions were moved 3 paces to the front, as at open order. Drawn up in this manner, we waited the arrival of the illustrious individual for whose amusement we had been called together. The Duke of Wellington, having arrived on the ground at an early hour, received the Emperors of Austria and Russia and the King of Prussia about 10 o'clock. On approaching the centre of the line, the front companies presented arms, the standards were lowered, and every band played God Save the King. In the suite of the Allied sovereigns on this occasion were Prince Blucher, Prince Schwarzenberg, Field Marshal Barclay de Tolly, Platov, Hetman of the Cossacks, the Archduke Constantine of Russia, 2 sons of the King of Prussia, and a very great many more of inferior rank. The breasts of some of those individuals were literally covered with decorations, and many of their uniforms were really splendid. The 3 monarchs were the plainest dressed individuals in the field, the Emperor of Austria being dressed in white, and the other 2 wearing plain green uniforms with a star. This part of the ceremony being over, the Field Marshal summoned around him the generals commanding divisions, and gave them instructions regarding the operations of the day, which very closely resembled those of the Allied army at Salamanca on the 22nd of July, 1812. The First Corps, moving to its left, passed between Montmartre and the walls of the capital to attack the right of our supposed enemy. On arriving at the barrier of Clichy, the corps debouched on the road to that village, when having established itself in rear of the foe, it halted. The Second Corps moved forward, but obliquely to the right, and then attacked the left of our invisible enemies. In this movement, the corps was supported by the 5th Division until the former succeeded in its objective, when the latter, with the other 2 divisions of the reserve, advanced in column at quarter distance, and with their light troops in front, moved round the northern base of Montmartre to the attack of the enemy's centre. On the arrival of the Second Corps in the vicinity of Clichy and the reserve within a few hundred yards of the road leading from that village to Paris, the whole halted, and the 5th and 6th Divisions formed line, the front line dressing on the 92nd Regiment. Every division now ordered arms and stood at ease for nearly half an hour. Just before moving from our original ground, Prince Blücher and staff, Platoff, etc., came forward to examine the dress of the 42nd, 79th and 92nd Highlanders. Many a remark was made, and many a joke cracked at the expense of the philibeg, but Donald, instead of getting sulky on the occasion, took a similar method of being revenged upon the gallant body of foreigners in his front, some of them being attired in uniforms which he considered no less singular than his own. During the temporary suspension of hostilities, the Archduke Constantine of Russia walked his horse up to the left of the 92nd Regiment and began to scrutinize the dress of the men. Having asked a young lad to show him his bonnet, the poor fellow, either not knowing the rank of the individual who was addressing him, or like some of his companions thinking him a queer-looking child, actually refused. Being then with the imperial cavalcade a little in front of the regiment and aware that his brother's countenance was no great introduction to him anywhere, the Emperor Alexander galloped up and in good English said, "Take off your cap, my lad, and show it to this gentleman." This at once removed the bonnet from the head of the Caledonian and placed it in the hands of the Russian prince, who, after examining it for a little, returned it to the owner, the Emperor at the same time remarking to his brother, "C'est un brave regiment." On their progress towards the right, the Emperor, turning to Captain F, said, "This is my brother, sir. Will you have the kindness to show him your sword?" On examining the claymore, the royal brothers returned it and then rejoined their distinguished friends. On resuming our arms, the First Corps, in column at quarter distance, again manoeuvred on the right of the enemy, and the Second Corps, also at quarter distance, turned Clichy by moving between the village and the reserve. The latter advanced the 7th Division at quarter distance, and the 5th and 6th Divisions in line. Soon after we moved, the heavy cavalry made a most beautiful charge past our flanks, which completed the rout of the enemy, and was the last offensive movement we made on that memorable day. It now only remained for us to pay our respects to the Emperor of Austria, and for that purpose the whole army halted, and the battalions then in line formed a column. In a few minutes, the Duke of Wellington and the allied sovereigns took post on the left of the road leading from Clichy to Neuilly, when the whole marched past the Emperor in column of companies at quarter distance. The review was attended by almost all the English nobility and gentry then in Paris. Their splendid equipages added much to the interest and magnificence of the scene, for at one time almost every part of the northern slope of Montmartre was completely covered with them. As the army advanced, however, the bow and the bells retired, and when the allied chiefs took their ground as before mentioned, the whole group assembled around them to witness the novel spectacle of a British army passing in review before an Emperor of Austria under the walls of the metropolis of France. During our stay in the camp of Clichy, my time was partly occupied in an attempt to reclaim from the paths of vice, without the aid of the cat-o'-nine tails, 6 men who had repeatedly given but too good proofs that they were ready and willing to engage in the perpetration of almost every description of crime. The measures I adopted on the occasion were the following. First of all, I divided the company into 3 classes. In the first were placed the best men, in the second the indifferent characters, and in the third the very worst. On the class rolls being made out, the company was turned out, the roll called, and each individual, on answering to his name, took post in the class to which he was appointed. The rueful countenances which those in the second and third classes exhibited on the occasion testified at once that none of them before that moment had conceived there was the smallest shade of difference between their own and the character of the best-behaved man in the company. For on being removed, as it were, from the society of the latter, I fancied I saw the tear of shame and repentance start in the eyes of various individuals, and my conjecture turned out to be well-founded. On the classes being told off, The members of the first were informed that they would have themselves alone to blame if they were removed at a future period from the proud station they occupied, and those of classes second and third were told that it would be equally their own fault if a month or two hence they should still find themselves in their degrading situations. This preliminary step being taken, I proceeded to divide the company into 6 squads, corresponding with the number of desperate characters in it. Each squad, which was composed of an equal proportion of each class, was placed under the orders of a non-commissioned officer. To each squad, one of the 6 bad characters was given in charge, with orders not to permit him to quit the camp either by night or day. This I did not conceive to be any great hardship, as they all slept in the same tents at night, and were all in camp together during the day. But the majority of the company thought otherwise, and demurred at being made responsible for the conduct of others. Being quite determined, however, to make a fair trial of the plan, I gave a deaf ear to their grumbling, and insisted on implicit obedience to the orders I had given them. A fortnight passed away, during which time there had been no thefts nor plundering excursions heard of in the company. Satisfied in their own minds by this time that a complete remedy had been found for the evils which had arisen in the company after the Battle of Waterloo, all the non-commissioned officers and a number of the privates of the company waited on me one morning, apologized for their previous conduct, thanked me for what I had done, and begged me to persevere in the same line of conduct. Encouraged by the prospect of success, I, by way of an additional inducement to good conduct, placed at the disposal of the company 5 prizes, consisting of useful articles of dress, to be drawn for at the end of the first month, by all those who, during the previous month, had been mustered in class first. The great amusement which the drawing of the little lottery afforded the men, and the keenness with which each individual contended for the lucky numbers, induced me to continue the same plan until relieved in the command of the company 4 months afterward, by which time my success had so far exceeded my expectations that prior to handing over the company to my successor, I had the inexpressible satisfaction of enrolling 4 of the bad characters in class first, and of seeing them contend with their comrades for the monthly prizes. On the 29th of October, we broke up our encampment on the banks of the Seine, and that evening our brigade occupied Saint-Germain, a town which the good people declared to us Bonaparte never entered. On the 2nd of November we marched into Montvilliers, Neuf-le-Vieux, Mer, etc., and on the 8th we removed to Montfort and some villages in the neighbourhood. In the vicinity of Montvilliers, Captain H.B.S. and I were billeted on an opulent and friendly family, with whom we spent 2 very pleasant days. The family, having, unknown to us, directed the servants to have breakfast ready for us the morning we were to leave them, we were not a little surprised to find the table groaning under a load of cold fowls, veal, ham, tea, coffee, wine, etc. After doing ample justice to the viands before us, we strolled out to look after the men and baggage animals. On our return, the servants were all busy wrapping up the cold meat in strong brown paper. Not knowing what they intended with it, we could not help smiling. By and by, however, we were let into the secret by the butler, who respectfully inquired where he should place the parcels. On recovering from the surprise which his query occasioned, we told him that British officers never accepted presents of any kind from families on whom they were billeted, and putting a piece of money in his hand, desired him to express to the family how much we felt obliged by their kindness and attention. Apparently astonished at our refusal, though probably more so at what we had given him, the butler remained dumb for some time, and then, with a smile, said, "Oh, you British officers are not like the Prussians." We remained very comfortably cantoned in Montfort, etc., until the following brigade order compelled us to move to Meulan. Brigade orders. Port Chartrain, November 29th, 1815. The 4th Battalion of the Royals, the 42nd and 92nd Regiments are to march tomorrow for Moulins on their route for Boulogne. The corps are to march independently, under orders from their respective commanding officers, who will please to send forward very early an officer to Moulins to receive directions respecting the quartering of their corps there and in the vicinity for the night. The staff surgeon has been instructed to give directions respecting the sick, and the commissary of brigade will afford all the means of transport in his power. Major General Sir Dennis Pack cannot allow these corps to pass thus from under his command without expressing his regret at losing them. The conduct of the 4th Battalion of the Royals, both in camp and quarters, has been like that of the 3rd Battalion, and that of the 2 regiments, orderly and soldier-like, and he is confident that from the high state of discipline the corps appears in, they would have imitated their comrades in the 3rd Battalion had the same glorious opportunity been afforded them. The services rendered by the 92nd Regiment in the Duke of Wellington's campaigns in the Peninsula and His Grace's late short and triumphant one in Belgium are so generally and so highly appreciated as to make praise from him almost idle. Nevertheless, he cannot help adding his tribute of applause. And to the 42nd Regiment he really thinks he would seem ungrateful as well as unmindful of the best feelings of a soldier, did he not, in taking leave, assure them that he will ever retain, with sentiments of admiration, the remembrance of the invincible valour displayed by the corps on so many memorable and trying occasions. On the 30th of November, the 42nd and 92nd Regiments marched into Moulins agreeable to orders, where, being joined by the 28th, the 3 corps formed into one brigade under Sir Charles Belson of the 28th Regiment, were ordered to move to Pontoise on the 1st of December, and thence by Beauvais, Abbeville, Montreuil and Boulogne to Calais. On our arrival before the gates of Calais on the 17th of December, we were not a little surprised to find them closed upon us, and that it was not the intention of the authorities to open them unless our commandant would agree to make every company march at the distance of 100 yards from the one preceding it, the men reverse their arms, keep their colours cased, and prevent the bands from playing on entering the town. Irritated at such conduct, instant admittance was demanded. This being refused, a second message was dispatched to the governor, giving him a quarter of an hour to deliberate. This brought the hot-headed fool to his senses. On the gates being opened, the leading battalion entered, and was instantly followed by the others at the usual distance, with colours flying, bayonets fixed, and the bands playing the downfall of Paris, all the way to the place of embarkation. That concludes the 19th and last part of the story. Thank you very much for listening. Please subscribe for more episodes and leave a comment.